Hey, thank you again for being here tonight. We have a special treat. Tonight we get to hear from Michelle Warren. Michelle Warren is the Advocacy and Strategic Engagement Director for the Christian Community Development Association. I don't know Michelle well, but her reputation precedes her. She's been here in the city of Denver for quite some time, and she's lived in the same neighborhood for over 2 decades, and her Husband, David, have been started actually Open Door Ministries and have been deeply embedded and rooted in their neighborhood over on Federal. So she lives in Athmar Park, and they understand what it means to invest in a particular geography. And in many ways, they are leading the way for churches like ours, learning how to live this parish life, wherein we say we are in and for this place and with the people that live here and work here. The Christian Community Development Association, you hear more about it from Michelle at some point in time tonight. But actually, more than that, I would like to draw your attention to this book that she wrote, okay? Power Proximity. It's going to be available on the front desk for purchase if you'd like. It's required reading for parish living. It's required reading for parish pastors. It's required reading for people who want to think about where they live and where they work in a different way, and living in proximity with other people. She literally wrote the book on it. So I'm really excited that in this Epiphany series we get to hear from Michelle. So would you please put your hands together and give Michelle a warm Inglewood welcome.
I am so glad to be here tonight. I am catching that vibe that you care about your community and that you aspire to dig deep roots and care more. But when we talk at the church that my husband and I just planted a little over a year ago, Westside Church International, we talk about zip codes, so 80219. You know, Denver has 88 neighborhoods, and I joke around that you're in one neighborhood and you go 3 blocks and you're in another one. So it's very easy to have a pretty large mass of neighborhoods, so we talk about our zip code and are just so grateful for the opportunity to work and to worship and to live in a community and dig deep roots. You know, the journey with Christ and living in community is long, and it is good that we are not alone, right? And that's what we want, you know, with our church, and I just can feel that vibe with you all tonight. And so I just am grateful. And let me just go ahead and open in prayer. God, I just pray a special blessing over this congregation and the 2 communities that are on their hearts in East Colfax and here in Inglewood. God, we are your people, and we want to be faithful with what you've given. So I just pray a blessing on this congregation and continue to ask that you would equip them for the work that you're calling them to do. In Jesus' name, amen. So I have been looking forward to this all week. I've been in Montgomery, Alabama from Tuesday to Saturday, and I did lead worship this morning, and it was fun. But the thing that has been just standing out there is I get to come to Sacred Grace and speak. And there's a lot of history in that because I moved to Denver back in 1996. I lived on Colfax, just a couple houses in from Colfax and Marion. Anybody knows where Colfax and Downing is? We were 1 block east, and my husband and I had joined a church called Open Door Fellowship with this idea that we were going to dig deep roots and that we were going to start a community development corporation called Open Door Ministries. That's the fast version. It didn't happen that quickly. We were there, actually, it's been about 23 years since we've moved here, and I remember all of the young people, I shouldn't say all of them, probably 4 young people at the time, because the city was not the same as it is now, would go to this Bible study on Tuesday night, and they were the hippest and the coolest. And my husband and I were just so over our heads in doing work at Open Door that I remember longing, thinking, yeah, I can't go. But boy, that sounds really cool. And so I heard of the idea of TNL, and it kind of picked up some pace, and over the years have grown, and I met Jared, and I've been excited. That 25-year-old who heard of TNL and just knew that that's not was going to be a part of my story, I feel like I'm kind of living my dream. I'm like, great! I get to be here at some point for one night and get to talk to you for about 20 minutes. But anyway, I'm just excited. I'm excited to be here. I'm also excited to talk to you a little bit about Epiphany. When Nathan had shared the series, I'm a worship leader, and while that's not my primary function, that's sort of the way I see the world. I love the rhythms of the Christian calendar. I love the focus, and when Advent comes, it's a brand new day. We end common time, and then all of a sudden, we're starting to journey with each other and just the narrative of the things and the basic elements of our foundations of our faith. And so I'm excited that you're still there. Usually Epiphany people take 1 week. I have a picture that I want to share with you about Epiphany. This is a more Ethiopian African work of art, and I'm going to just show you pictures and videos. There's not going to be a whole lot of text up there, but I just like it to sit there and just, kind of take in this season. This season, when we recognize that the light that was anticipated in Advent has come. The light has come, and I love John 1, where the darkness couldn't even, and this is a King James Version, the darkness could not even comprehend the light. Think about that for a little bit. That the darkness is so black, and it is so static, and it has all of these different emotions and feelings that you can't even comprehend anything different. And this idea that Jesus Christ came, that he was this promise keeper, that he came to this dark place with the light, and it broke forth, and the darkness couldn't even comprehend it. As we look at Epiphany and we think about that light that was the light of men, Jesus came and he had a great few years as he just shared his heart and he taught us about his kingdom. And he said that he was the light of the world. And so often we think about that. And in the darkness, we want to see Christ's light shine, right? But what I want to talk to us about tonight, and what I think the real spirit of Epiphany is that after Christ came and declared himself the light, he said, I am the light of the world. But then he said, you are the light of the world. And the whole purpose of a Christian and a Christian community is to shine forth that light in a darkness that cannot even comprehend what that light is. And so I want to talk a little bit about that tonight. I'm going to go ahead to another slide because the reality is I'm still in Advent a little bit. And that's what I want to talk to you about. So I'm going to go backwards a little bit and tell you some stories. So this is just a piece of artwork that shows the story of Mary and Joseph on that journey. And if you know anything about that journey, Mary and Joseph get to the journey, to the end, and all of a sudden, what happens? This huge, long journey. She's pregnant. Who knows if they were traveling alone? Often artists talk about traveling alone, but typically to travel alone was not so wise. And so while the text in the New Testament doesn't necessarily, say it overtly, I just want you to think that maybe they weren't alone. Maybe there was this caravan of people going and traveling with them to Bethlehem to be counted so that they would be safe. So just that picture, I just want you to get a little bit bigger than the picture of Jesus and Mary traveling. And of course, when they got there, people were finding their places, right? And what happens to Mary and Joseph? They knock on the door, and they knock on the door, and they knock on the door, and nobody opens it, right? Except one innkeeper. And the reason I'm sharing about this is because in my church, first of all, I'm in a Latino community, and so has anybody heard of a posadas? Okay, a posadas is this reenacting of the story of Mary and Joseph. And that there's this time that Mary and Joseph would go and they would say, please let us in. And this is singing back and forth. And they do it in Spanish way better than that, with beautiful liturgy, actually. You all should think about trying it with your liturgical lens. And they say, please let us in. No, we're not going to let you in. It goes back and forth until finally they get to the innkeeper and they say, please let us in. And he said, okay, you can come in and find rest. You can find posadas. You can find shelter. There's actually not a really good translatable word for posadas, but that's the idea. Shelter, inn, refuge. We recognize your journey has been long and come in. I share that a little bit with you because that's where my heart has been. Nathan said that I work for the Christian Community Development Association, and I didn't always. It's 2019. Who wears just one hat, right? I'm here tonight. I got to lead worship and work for a church. But my day job at this point, after leaving Open Door Ministries, my husband's here tonight. He's the executive director there, and we started that 23 years ago, and he's still faithfully serving. I left, but I went and worked for the Christian Community Development Association. So if anybody knows anything about Open Door, or it's Open Door Fellowship and Open Door Ministries are a part of the Christian Community Development Association. It's a national network of Christians who are trying to live out a shared philosophy. They make intentional choices of where they live. They care much about, the church being the hub of the wheel. They care about leadership development and reconciliation and redistribution. And there's this philosophy. Nathan asked me to bring things for the CCDA, and I was like, yeah, all I got is electronic. So you can find it on a website. Isn't that the way it goes? At ccda.org. So if you want to go ahead and look at that, I invite you to do that. But we have this, National Association of Practitioners who are living in some of the most at-risk, vulnerable communities around the country. And when you live and you gain deep, deep roots in your community, it radically changes the way you see the world. It radically changes the way you see yourself in the world. It also radically changes the way you see yourself, period. And you begin to brush up against a lot of different cultural norms. At least that was my story, breaking up, and it helped transform the way I see things in the world. When I arrived in Denver 23 years ago, it was actually starting to get a little expensive. If I told you the prices, you'd laugh and say, oh no, that is not expensive. The cost of living is just so outrageous now. And I share that because the philosophy of CCDA and these practitioners is you're going to live in the same community that you're going to work and worship. And so we moved right off of Colfax, and we'd lived there for a little bit, and we'd started this ministry, and all of a sudden, we thought, you know what, we've been living in apartments, we've been living in community. I think we're going to live in a house now. I want a driveway. I'm going to have, and now I'm almost with 2 kids, and I'm getting tired of, schlepping things. Let's go look for a driveway. That's hard to find in the city. It was a very high bar. Doesn't sound like it, but it was a high bar. Anyway, we went looking, and the prices were so high, and, we weren't making very much money, and we ended up landing in this community at Federal and Alameda. That was about 21 years ago, and if anybody knows anything about Federal and Alameda, it's a very diverse community. It's predominantly Latino. There's some Vietnamese and a little bit of a lot of people, but for the most part, it's Latino. And I remember getting over there saying, oh, this is so frustrating. I'm like 5 whole miles away from this community that I wanted to invest in downtown. And at that time, it was predominantly African-American and Anglo, and that was where my heart was and where Dave's heart. We were going to do this great reconciliation work amongst Africans, Americans, and now we're in this Latino community. And I remember thinking, this is such a waste of time. This is so frustrating. We would dream about how fast we could make it over back to East Colfax. But God was going to begin to birth his light in my heart, to have a bigger vision of what reconciliation would look like and begin to open my eyes to needs. I share all that with you because while I have a title of Advocacy and Strategic Engagement Director, while I do worship and I'm a wife and a mother and all of these different hats that I wear, the one that I'm actually quite proud of is immigration activist. I'm a political activist. That's exactly what it even says in my title, an advocacy director. Why would a person who loves God, wants to worship, work, and minister in the same community, how did they end up being an activist? So I've told you a little bit about my story, right? Told you a little bit about my neighbors. They're Latino. I'm digging deep roots in the community. I'm raising my family, and all I want to do is be a good neighbor. The reality is, every single day, rolling out of bed to choose to be a good neighbor in my community has put intentional steps where now I can say, you know what, I am working very hard to make sure that I don't just love my neighbors in a small way, but I love it in the deepest way. And if you're going to have immigrants for your neighbors, you're going to care tremendously about immigration policy. You're going to care very much about the opportunities they have to move forward. And so on a regular basis, I actually work with Congress. I was really glad you're praying for Congress and the president. That's what I do as an advocacy director. I work in areas of immigration reform, mass incarceration, education equity. There's some other issues. But the reason that's important to a Christian, the reason that's important to the church, is we can't just love people this thin. We've got to love them deeply. And I intentionally chose the word activist instead of advocate. First of all, it's kind of provocative. The look on your faces all changed when I said that. So I like that, actually. It's kind of a little disruptive. No, I chose that because the difference between an advocate is somebody who obviously speaks on behalf of somebody, speaks on behalf of uses their platform to tell and explain what's going on. But an activist is somebody who says, there's no line I won't cross to make sure that justice is going forth, that the flourishing of people is able to move forward in the right and radical ways of shalom, right? Where everything can be restored. And so I have to tell you all of that because while I'm talking about posadas, and while I'm talking about just the idea of Advent, I want to tell you a couple stories of what I got to do. So during the Advent season, I went down, I actually go probably every month or so. I was down at the border. And I know that we are focusing a bit on the outsider. I think it's great that we're having a community meal and people from the community are going to come in and speak, come in and eat. And I think those are important initial steps. But there are outsiders beyond 80219. There are outsiders beyond Inglewood that we as Christians need to think because God came not just for the whole person and the whole world, right? And there's responsibilities that we need to consider. I'm going to go ahead and ask us to move to the next slide. So when I was I went to the border for what we called a National Posadas Action. We'll go to the next one after Matthew 25. I want to show you a picture. A National Posadas Action. People from all over the country like me were coming to the border. We were coming to the border because there's a caravan. I don't know if you noticed. And maybe you're starting to catch even language I was using, right? Mary and Joseph, maybe not driving alone, maybe we're not walking alone, but in a whole group of people coming north. This has been a huge, major news story. I don't bring it up to be political. I tell you this because 7,000 people are sitting at our borders trying to figure out how they're going to have posadas, right? How are they going to have shelter? How are they going to have the opportunity to move forward? Oops. That's my last slide. So I would love to go to the slide that has me holding this really sweet baby. So I got to go to the border in December, and I got to hold a little boy whose parents had left Honduras a couple months before. The mom was 5 months pregnant. There was a 2-year-old little boy, there was a 6-year-old little girl and a dad, and they walked all the way through Honduras, all the way through Guatemala, and up to Mexico City, and all of a sudden, the wife began to go into labor. She began to go into labor, and she was only 7 months pregnant. They had no money. At that point, they had spent everything. They had no cars, so they literally just walked that whole way. They had been traveling for a couple months, and now she's getting ready to give birth. And she ends up giving birth in a hospital in Mexico City. And as they were telling me this story, the dad was like, okay, the baby was born, and the doctor said, there's no way this baby is going to live. And then the next day, he lived. And so they sat there again. It was the second day. The doctor's like, there's no way this baby is going to live. And the baby lived. 4 days that happened. Well, the caravan had continued to move on. It was just this family in Mexico City. They didn't have the safety. They didn't have the camaraderie, but they had a dream that they were going to make it to the border where they'd be able to leave the gangs that he was trying to get out of and maybe start a new opportunity for their family. And so all of a sudden, that pretty much stops. An organization, this is how I found out about them, an organization had heard about their story and actually went by bus and brought them to Tijuana, and that's where I got to meet them. And so I heard this man talking about his journey, talking about his dreams, and then he handed me his little baby. And he told me, he's just like, after 4 days, I told the doctor, I told my wife, I was like, it's time to go. And they're like, are you kidding? He's like, absolutely. Every day they tell me the baby's going to die. Every day we've got a journey. We've got to finish. We need to get to where we need to get. Maybe we will have an opportunity. And I just was so encouraged and inspired by the hope that this man had in God carrying him. And so I got to meet them, and like I said, I'm holding this little boy. Now, if you kind of start to add the months, the baby, as I was holding him, he was 1 month old, so he would have been born a month later. So he's still premature. That does not look like a premature baby. I mean, he looked so healthy and so ruddy, and the dad was telling me all about the dreams that he and his family had if they could get in. And as a person who knew what was going on as an American, my humanity was taking over. And I kept thinking, there's no way you're going to get in. You're number 1,617 on the list. And there's 7,000 of you across the border. And we're only hearing 25 applications a day. And as I prayed over this little boy, I was also praying for my own soul. God, help me to believe and hope in the story that you are writing for this little boy. Help me to believe and hope in your light. Give me joy. Give me joy like this man has. In you, this hope in you, and that he would be greeted with hospitality. In Matthew 25, there is a scripture that I want to talk about a little bit. In the Advent season, you begin to realize, and I'm sure you guys did a great job of it, that this idea of light, that it's bursting forth in darkness, right? And that we're celebrating Jesus coming for the very first time. But the true story of Advent is to remember that, yeah, he came, but he's coming again. That at another time in the future, there will be light that will burst forth forever, and that God is returning. And that while we're waiting, we need to see and evaluate and examine and live by faith so that our light is shining forth in the darkness. I kind of told you a little bit about that in the beginning. So as I was reading in the Gospels, having had this experience, I was reading Matthew 23, 24, and 25. Matthew 23, by the way, you should do homework and read these. Matthew 23 is this scathing chapter back and forth. I mean, Jesus is coming unleashed at the Pharisees. He's calling them hypocrites like every other verse. They're trying to set him up and trap him. You can see why we're going to end up with the crucifixion of Jesus not too far after that. But that's important because the stage is getting kind of hostile. There's an end coming to his ministry. Chapter 24 really is Jesus is predicting his second return. That nobody's going to know the time. Nobody's going to know the hour. And as somebody who was a worship leader thinking about Advent, that's exactly what we're celebrating in Advent. But chapter 25 is what I want to draw because there's 3 parables that Jesus talks about. And I will just say this. How we wait for Christ to return is important. There are 3 parables. One's the 10 virgins, and you can read it, and you got to have oil, actually it has nothing to do with oil, but basically you need to be ready. The second one has to do with the talents. God is giving us things to steward as we wait, and we need to make sure that we are investing well because he's coming back to see what we're doing with that light that he gave us. But the third one is Matthew 25, and it says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. And the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger or invite you in or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? And I'll end with this. The king will reply, truly, I will tell you whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. As we think about being agents of light in darkness, we need to remember and reflect some of these very basic elements of Matthew 25. See, we don't have eyes to even see Jesus and the hungry. We don't often see him even across our screens. We think, oh, that migrant caravan, those dirty people. But the reality is that we are constantly being asked to expand our view of what the darkness is supposed to look like, that we're supposed to push in with the light in new ways so that people like, my friend Alvin and his brand new son Josue and his family will be able to have an opportunity. I want to share just 2 videos with you as I close because in that Advent season, I was able to meet with a man named Father Pat. Father Pat is an American who is at Casa del Migrante, and he is working with all of the migrants who are there, thousands and thousands of people in the camps. And he shared a video that I want to go ahead and play that I think will be a good almost close for us tonight.
Door. And sometimes you can't solve the problem of 10,000 Hondurans who are in Tijuana, but you could open the door of your heart and maybe reach out and help a person in your neighborhood who's suffering, or help an organization that helps migrants. So I think it's a very powerful symbol in which those who have power are invited to help those who are very vulnerable at this moment in their lives.
He said something that it's quite a beautiful exchange when those who have power and an opportunity use that for the vulnerable. One of those parables he talks about is the parable of the talents in Matthew 25, one of the servants was given 5, one was given maybe 3, and I don't actually remember, 10, 5, 2, whatever. There was a big amount, there was a little amount, and there was a very tiny amount. And the reality is that the person with a lot invested a lot. And the person with just 1 didn't do anything with it. And so when you begin to think about what we're going to do with the light that we're supposed to be pushing into the darkness, we have to ask ourselves, God, what have you given us to invest? How can we use what you've given to bless and to really minister and to spread your message to the outsider and to others? Jesus in his upside-down kingdom, so often when I see the talents, I think money. And if I don't think money, I think big, huge, wealthy assets. And if I had a lot, I could give a lot. But I just wonder if when Jesus was sharing that talent parable, if that maybe those who were poor, blessed are the poor in spirit, maybe they're the ones with the 5. Maybe those of us with a lot of wealth and security and all this education, maybe we just have 1. And we're being tested. What are we going to do with it? And our temptation is to say, you know what? I'm so overwhelmed by it. I don't know what to do. I'm going to shut down. There's people all over the world. They're in my community. I don't even know if I can go pray for the city of Inglewood from 7 to 7:30 on a Wednesday morning. I think I'm just going to keep it right here. And I just want to challenge us to realize in this upside-down kingdom, it doesn't matter how much we've been given, that we as agents of light are expected and we are called and we are inspired to push that light into the darkness. I was a very depleted person in December. I was sad and I was depressed and I kept saying, God, I need you to give me joy. And I found it on the caravan with the most desperately poor people. Their talents were so big and they were doing such a good job of sharing it with other people and even sharing it with me. So I'm going to go ahead and just ask us to play this other video, which is a 5-year-old Honduran girl. You'll listen to her sing and you'll read the English translation of what she sang on the caravan.
Okay.
Ayer te vi llorar, pidiéndole a Dios un milagro. Y tú llorando mis soledades en tu vivir. No hay gloria si no hay desierto. No hay victoria sin antes llorar. Aunque ha sido el camino, pero Dios sé que Él nunca te abandonará.
Such a sweet little 5-year-old girl just sitting on the side of the road waiting to have her petition be heard, singing a song of praise to the Lord, saying, even though I know the path is difficult, I know that Jesus, I'll fill it in, that Jesus will never abandon us. After the celebration of Epiphany and the wise men, Jesus and Mary and Joseph, remember? The angel comes to Joseph in a dream. I want to end with this slide as I walk off. And just, it's more of a present day of the Holy Family. At dream, after the wise men had come to Herod, and he had said, the angel said, go a different way. You need to get out, you need to flee. And so they fled to Egypt to run for their lives. I just wanted to end with that picture of that Holy Family, even in just a present day form, and just challenge us all to consider what God has for us as light, as agents of light, pushing forth in the darkness with outsiders. Thank you.